Y'all turn to Titus chapter 3. And we continue dealing with the topic of heresy. And you know, the word heretic gets thrown around today and used in ways that it ought not even be used and all. But look, when you deal with heresy or talking about heresy, what we want to do is see what the Scriptures actually says. Now, should anyone ever be glad to have some situation to deal with like that? Folks, if you're happy to be dealing with it, you need to stop and take a look at your own self. It ain't nothing you want to have to deal with, right? But I want to show you what Paul says about these things, and then we'll talk about it. In Titus chapter 3, and Titus really is the book that's all about this. I'll tell you what, just to give you an idea, go back to chapter 1. Look at verse 5. He says, "For this cause left I thee in Crete." He's leaving Titus in Crete. "That thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting or lacking, and ordain elders in every city as I have appointed thee." So he's telling him, I'm sending you there to put men in charge of these assemblies, to pick guys that are founded in the faith, and to put them in charge where they can, when I say in charge, I don't mean ruling them. I mean they're going to be men that can keep them guide them, keep them heading in the right direction. So there's the first thing, because he tells them there in verse 9, "Holding fast the faithful word as he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and convince the gainsayers, for," or because, "there are many unruly and vain talkers and deceivers, especially they of the circumcision, whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake." So in other words, I'm sending you there to get these men situated in these assemblies where they can keep things going on the king's highway, on the narrow way. Because there's people entered in among you, and it was especially they of the circumcision, that were teaching other things. And what was the most common motive for a man teaching another doctrine?
Money.
Money. Now, does that sound familiar? It's still going on today, isn't it? Look, you teach the truth and you're not going to have any huge following. Not today, anyway. And I don't mean that anybody that's got any group of people following. What I mean is, you go into an area like this, and if you just preach the gospel, the Lord will gather the people that He wants to hear the gospel, and He'll gather the assemblies as He sees fit. But if you're going somewhere to build a church, as they say, you ain't going to build it preaching the gospel. That's why in seminary they spend 6 months studying the Bible and 3.5 years studying how to build an assembly. Hey, whoever told anybody to go build an assembly? You're not told to do that, are we? Okay, so now, back over to chapter 3. In verse 8.
That Jews they're talking about.
Yeah.
The uncircumcised circumcision.
It is, and they're coming in teaching. You know what the Jew would do in an assembly. He'd come in and use the law to get them to do what he wanted to do. Now, verse 8, he says, chapter 3, verse 8. "This is a faithful saying, and these things I would that thou affirm constantly, that they which have believed in God might be careful to maintain good works." Then are good works important? Can a man work to save himself? No. Your works don't amount to a hill of beans outside of Christ. But does Christ save us unto good works? Now he says, "Careful to maintain good works, these things are good and profitable unto men." So in other words, he's telling them, do the things that edify, right? Edify means what? Build up. Not build up numbers, build up the believers in the faith. Well, what's the opposite of build up? Well, what's heresy do? It tears it down. He says, verse 9, "But avoid foolish questions." You know, he's not talking about he's talking about to Titus here, who's appointing elders. So Titus is obviously a man that's got some experience. Avoiding foolish questions. I have found over time, the longer I do this, that's one of the most important things you've got to do with believers, is avoid foolish questions. I recently had someone ask me, they said, "Do you like so-and-so?" And I said, "Well, yeah. What do you mean, do I like it?" He said, "Well, I notice every time he asks a question or makes a comment, you kind of get a funny look on your face." It's at a class in Florida, and I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, that's I shouldn't do that. I'm not a good, I don't want you to say it, I don't know how to hide, you know what I mean? I need to do a better job hiding it. But the reason is, I said, no, I don't dislike them and all. And I didn't even tell the person the reason I make that. But the reason is because every time this person stops class to make a comment, it's never anything to do with, it's never profitable. In other words, it's always an attempt to show somebody what he knows, if that makes sense. It's always, let me show you some wow thing that nobody's seen. You know what I mean? Folks, you don't need that. We don't need that sort of stuff. That sort of stuff's best left alone. So I just avoid it. When he does it, I don't want to hurt his feelings because I believe he's sincere. But when he goes through all of that, I just smile and say thank you and move on. Well, if you get into these foolish conversations, all right, let's say a man says, did Adam have a belly button? Now, there are actually people that argue over that. Do y'all know that? I'm serious. Folks, I don't know. He didn't have an umbilical cord that I know of, so I don't guess he would have one, but what would it matter either way? Now, we could turn that into a doctrinal argument about the creation of man and just go on and on. You could do the same thing with the birth of Christ. How, was there literally seed, the same seed of Israel? You see what I mean? What does it matter? See, avoid those kind of things. Now, why is he telling this man to avoid foolish questions? What is the natural attitude of a man?
Right.
Be prideful and to want to take a stance, isn't it? Y'all know, you ever met anybody that just always wants to take the opposite side? Y'all know anybody like me and Chris know somebody like that comes to mind immediately. I ain't picking on him. I could say it's a beautiful day and he'd say, I disagree. I disagree with you. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? Well, I saw clouds and it's going to do this. I could say it's a beautiful day. In other words, it's just going to take the opposite. I had an uncle once that said the Saints played the Vikings, and the Vikings had this receiver named Clark, and he caught a last-minute touchdown and beat the Saints. And I had an uncle that saw that, and it was an unbelievable catch. It was incredible. Well, the next week we were at my granny's, Thanksgiving, watching another game, and Jerry Rice was on. Everybody knows Jerry Rice, don't you? Anybody remember Clark? Nobody remembers Clark, do you? My other uncle that I spent so much time with, I just loved, was a football, he's an official football man. He said, well, I tell y'all what, that Jerry Rice, he said, he's the best receiver in the league. This guy's really going to do something. And he liked him because he got his hands from catching bricks. His dad was a bricklayer. And in the summers, he worked for his dad. And he said his dad throw bricks up and he'd catch them. And that's how he got his hands so good and strong. And my uncle's telling that story. And he said, I'm telling y'all keep y'all's eye on this guy. This guy's going to be something. And my other uncle said, I disagree. Clark's the best in the league and blah, blah. Now, all he knew was the one game he had seen. My other uncle was an authority on football. Well, here we are 25, 30 years later. Let me ask y'all, which uncle was right? Right? Hey, I'll tell y'all flat out, my Uncle Westland knew what he was talking about. He said it. Jerry Rice is to this day the greatest receiver that's ever played, didn't he? I'll never forget what my uncle said to him when he said that. He said, well, that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their own stupid opinion. And he turned back and started watching the game. Now, that was more than he should have said, but does every man have an opinion?
Yes.
When you oppose their opinion, what happens?
You're wrong.
You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm not telling you we don't take a stand on the truth, but folks, you got to pick your battles. If it's not a fundamental doctrine that's going to affect the assembly, is it something to get into? Let them have their opinion. Preach the gospel and God will take care of it. Now he says again in verse 9, avoid foolish questions and genealogies. Now, genealogies would cover the Jewish idea, I'm from this tribe and that tribe. It would cover today, well, there's been a so-and-so in this church for, a member of my family's been here for. But think about the other thing that it covers. Where would you and I encounter genealogies today? In the Bible. Aren't there a bunch of genealogies in here? I have first-hand experience at this one. Have y'all ever met anyone that has made it their life's mission to prove dates? Second coming date? All these different figure-it-all-out dates. There are date setters out there. They have made it their mission. You know where they spend all their time at? In those genealogies. So-and-so lived this many hundred years and did this and this many and this and this and all down through there, right? And yet you've got 4 verses that sum up the entire time. They say it was this many years, the Bible says from here over to here. And you don't need to figure out everything in between, do you? What's 100 plus 100? Sienna, what's 100 plus 100?
200.
200. How about that? 5 years old. 200, right? Did she need to start counting every toe?
No, she didn't.
See, why go through all of that? When a man does that today, when he spends all his time trying to prove those genealogies, when he adds all the years up and he comes up with the same figure and he says, see there? It says, and look, and I'll show you. Is he walking by faith or is he walking by visual mathematical proof? He's walking by sight, isn't he? If God said it's going to be X amount of years or it was X amount of years, what's wrong with just saying then that's how long it was? See, those things aren't profitable. He says avoid the genealogies and contentions. What does contention mean? Fighting. And strivings about the law, for they are unprofitable and vain. Then what was good and what was unprofitable? Good was good works, edifies. What's unprofitable? Fighting over doctrine. Do y'all see the point? If a man wants to make his stand all about his doctrinal knowledge, remember what James said? Okay, you want to brag on your faith? That's fine. Watch my works and I'll show you my faith. Now how it kind of, we had a, well, I ain't going to tell that. Sorry, verse 10. A man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition reject, knowing that he that is such is subverted. And that's a very strong word, subverted. You know what it has to do? A foundation being broken. He is subverted and sinneth, being condemned of himself. Now y'all think about this man over here with these intentions. This guy that has split up an assembly and led a group of people off, right? His thinking was wrong. He took a verse, let's say, and started some movement with the verse. But you know what that man knows 20 years later in his heart? He knows what his motive was. He knows. I looked right in the eyes of a guy the other day that did something like this involving me, and to this day, he knows what his motive was. I can look right in his face and see it. He knows what it was about. I do too. I've been on the other side. I've caused problems and then stand here today and I was wrong from the get-go. I entered into it with the wrong intention. Okay? Now, let's go back and let's read a story, if y'all would, in 1 Kings 13. There's a real good picture back here how all this happens. Alright, now we're talking about walking the King's Highway, the narrow way. And when we fall off, who's the only one that can get us back in the path? The Lord can, okay? We got to go to the Lord with it. So we're going to walk this King's Highway. Now watch this example of a man. Y'all remember Jeroboam had took over and invented a false religion, didn't he? He set up 2 golden calves and led Israel off into apostasy. Never to be seen. Remember we read that last week, I think. But watch what happens next. After Jeroboam started his false religion, 13:1. Behold, there came a man of God, a prophet, a true prophet, out of Judah by the word of the Lord unto Bethel. That's where one of the golden calves was. And Jeroboam stood by the altar to burn incense. So there's Jeroboam acting as high priest, just about to do the thing, and here comes a man to correct him. Did Jeroboam have an opportunity then to correct?
Yeah.
Now, heresy has already started, but couldn't it have been corrected? If Jeroboam's intention was sincere, couldn't it have been corrected right here? But what was Jeroboam's intention? He said, I got to start a false religion, otherwise the people will go back to Jerusalem. So his intention was he wanted a following, wasn't it? A man that wants a following, that's taught a bad doctrine to get a following, is he ever going to go back on that doctrine? Never. Now he says, verse 2, he cried out against the altar. Notice he don't even cry out against Jeroboam. Look at the long suffering of God. He cries out against the altar. Against the altar in the word of the Lord, and said, O altar, altar, thus saith the Lord, behold, a child shall be born unto the house of David, Josiah by name. And he goes on to tell him something that was going to happen. And everybody knows, about 400 years later, I think it was, Josiah the king is raised up. And he gets so motivated to serve the Lord, he starts with getting rid of the idols, doesn't he? He even went up here and destroyed this one. Exactly what this man prophesied came to pass years later. But look in verse 4. It came to pass when King Jeroboam heard the saying of the man of God, which he had cried against the altar in Bethel, that he put forth his hand from the altar, saying, Lay hold on him and his hand. And he put forth against him, dried up, so that he could not pull it in again. Look, God gives Jeroboam a sign. He takes his hand and said, let's go and arrest this man. His hand withers up. Did Jeroboam have an opportunity here to turn? He sure did. That says, verse 5, the altar also was rent, the ashes poured out from the altar according to the sign which the man of God had given. The king answered and said unto the man of God, Entreat now the face of the Lord thy God, and pray for me, that my hand may be restored again. And the man of God besought the Lord. The king's hand was restored him again, and became as it was before. And the king said unto the man of God, Come home with me, and refresh thyself, and I'll give thee a reward. Now I want y'all to consider for a second here. Was Jeroboam sincere enough wanting to get his arm healed? He wanted that arm healed, didn't he? But it says, the man of God said unto the king, If thou wilt give me half thine house, I will not go in with thee, neither will I eat bread nor drink water in this place. For was it so charged me by the word of the Lord, saying, Eat no bread, nor drink water, nor turn again by the same way that thou camest. So he went another way and returned. Now I want y'all to just consider what the man said. God sent this man on a task, didn't he? And what did he tell him not to do? Don't eat or drink anything that they offer you. Now what's the spiritual picture? God give us His Word? Where are we supposed to feed ourselves from spiritually? From His Word. Do we take in those teachings that the world offers up? No, folks, we turn from all of that, right? Now this man knew that. This king could not turn him. Literally, this pagan king could not get the man of God to act against what God had told him. Now, this is a mighty man of God, isn't it? This is the king talking. Watch what happens next. Verse 11 says, now I want y'all to picture who's behind Jeroboam getting him to do what he did. The devil, the wiles of the devil. Did the devil fail at using the king to affect this prophet? Yeah. Well, where would you expect the devil to go next? An emperor? An angel? No. More powerful is not going to help, is it? No. Watch what he does. Watch what he does. Now there dwelt an old prophet in Bethel, and his sons came and told him all the works that the man of God had done that day in Bethel, the words which he had spoken unto the king, and they told also their father. And their father said unto them, What way went he? His son said, Seeing what way the man of God went, which came from Judah, he said unto his son, Saddle me the ass. So they saddled the ass, and he rode thereon. He went after the man of God, and found him sitting under an oak. And he said unto him, Art thou the man of God that camest from Judah? He said, I am. I want y'all to notice something, by the way. Was he standing or sitting? Sitting. He said unto him, Come home with me and eat bread. Now, did God tell him not to eat the king's bread, or don't eat any bread in that place? No bread in that place. He says, and he said, I may not return with thee, nor go in with thee, neither will I eat bread nor drink water with thee in this place. For it was said to me by the word of the Lord, Thou shalt eat no bread nor drink water there, nor turn again to go by the way that thou camest. He said unto him, I am a prophet also, as thou art. And an angel spake unto me by the word of the Lord, saying, Bring him back with thee into thine house, that he may eat bread and drink water. But he lied unto him. Now think what the devil did. Did the devil fail at using the most powerful man in the country? No. So what's he go to next? A false prophet. This man, I cannot in any shape, form, or fashion call him a prophet. Nothing in here says God spoke to him. Now, he's a prophet of old. He probably went to the school of the prophets or whatever. But what has he just done? He's just lied about the Word of God. You see, this prophet is already taking in bread that he ought not be taking in, isn't he? Spiritual bread. Is he hearing words that are not true? And here they come into him. Now, didn't God tell him, don't you do it? You know, I saw this week, somebody sent me a thing, John sent me an email where the Pope changed the, what we call the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. Did y'all see the Pope changed it this week? Did y'all see that on the news? Yeah, he changed some things about it that I forget. Y'all Google it, you can see. He changed it, right? Well, what right's he got to change anything? Well, who said what he said? God. Well, what right has this prophet got to say, no, God changed his mind? He said this now. Now what should the prophet have said? I serve the unchanging God. He didn't say one thing and do another. With him it's not yea and nay, it's yea or nay. But he doesn't. Watch what happens. Verse 19. He went back with him and did eat bread in his house and drank water. And it came to pass as they sat at the table that the word of the Lord came unto the prophet that brought him back. He cried unto the man of God that came from Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord, forasmuch as thou hast disobeyed the mouth of the Lord, and hast not kept the commandment which the Lord thy God commanded thee, and camest back, and hast eaten bread and drunk water in this place, of the which the Lord did say to thee, Eat no bread, drink no water, thy carcass shall not come unto the sepulchre of thy fathers. And it came to pass after he had eaten bread, and after he had drunk, that he saddled him the ass to wit for the prophet whom he brought back. And when he was gone, a lion met him by the way and slew him, and his carcass was cast in the way. So what happens to the true prophet? A lion gets him. What did Peter say Satan's doing today? He's walking about the earth like a roaring lion, looking for whom he may devour. What did he have to do before before the lion could devour this man? What had to happen to him? He had to be deceived, didn't he? Could the lion have devoured this man if he'd been walking in the way? No. Now, you know, even in this, the man's not lost, folks. He's just a disobedient servant of God. And God chastises his own, doesn't he? You don't read anything about the false prophet dying for lying, do you? You know, lots of times we look at this world and we say, this doesn't seem fair. They just do whatever they want there. Well, David had those same thoughts. Remember that in the Psalms? David said, I look out here and the evil are promoted and they're just doing wonderful. And you remember what the Lord basically told him? For a little while. For just a little while yet, they profit. But what did Paul say? He said, there's resurrection. And if we've got our sights set on the resurrection, are we interested in just a little while here? No. We set our sights on something greater, don't we? Now this man here that the lion eats, could the lion have ate the man if the man didn't first eat the false bread? Well, there's how heresy works. Look, when that man was faced with that heresy, he had the Word of God to stand on, didn't he? He could have said, no, God said. Well, how did Eve get tricked? He said, did God really say you can't? You see, it's all the same picture over and over again. So Satan comes in, and his wiliest method, it seems to me, is to enter into a congregation, either in a person that's saved and yet lifted up in a moment of pride, or in a false believer altogether who's there for another intention. He introduces a false teaching, and then what happens? A little leaven leavens the whole lump. Okay? Now let's go look at another way of dealing with this. Go back over to Titus 1 again.
The devil don't even have to divide, but nowadays people are already divided.
Yeah, they sure are.
But he did it to begin with, I guess.
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
You know, there's a picture, just reading through the Bible, I'm in Numbers right now, and when you come across at the beginning of the wilderness, one of the things as you read those Old Testament stories, you just see the basic teachings of the New. It's all through there. It's just the same thing. But at the beginning with the first generation, they start their wilderness journey over here, the first. And you remember, because of their unbelief, all the firstborn had to be done away, didn't it? And at the end over here, you got the second one. It's a type of the firstborn not getting the things of God, our secondborn, that which is born again. But as they're about to go into the promised land over here, the second generation, God tells Moses to number them again, right? So Moses numbers them again. And this time when he numbers them, he doesn't just say, of the tribe of Dan, there's this many, and the tribe that, right, like he did before. This time he says, and of the tribe of Reuben, there's so-and-so, the leader of the, it'd be like there's Chris, and the leader of the Chrisites, and there's Wayne, he's the head of the Waynites, and there's Sully, the head of the Sullyites. And he just keeps going down the list with all these ites. And you think, well, what is this a picture of? Well, the wilderness journey, Paul says, is a picture for the church, isn't it? Look today. Did Christ come and with 12 apostles found his church? And what do you have today? thousands of ites, don't you? Families, divisions, separate, each one leading his own ites like that. It's just showing you this is what the outcome is of this stuff. Now we talk about these men who must be stopped. Let's just read from verse 11 again. Teaching bad doctrines. Whose mouths must be stopped, who subvert whole houses, teaching things which they ought not for filthy lucre's sake. One of themselves, even a prophet of their own, he's going to quote a poet here, said, the Grecians are always liars, evil beasts, slow bellies. This witness is true. Wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith. Does he suggest here that you rebuke them? You know, today people would rather have unity rather than, they'll sacrifice doctrine in terms of unity, won't they?
Yeah.
Well, if you've got bad doctrine, do you really actually have any unity? No. Notice there couldn't be unity amongst us if we're faking it. Okay? We need, and we're going to get to how to deal with this, but he says 14, not giving heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men that turn from the truth. Unto the pure all things are pure, but unto them that are defiled and unbelieving is nothing pure. Even their mind and conscience is defiled. Now watch this. They profess that they know God. Then are they right there in the assembly? Yeah. Do they say all the right things? Folks, people learn Christian speech quick. They learn whatever movement they're in. They learn all the slogans and they know how to say the right things and all that. He said, they profess that they know God, but in works they deny Him, being abominable and disobedient, and unto every good work reprobate. So how did he say you would know them? By their works. Look, if your doctrine doesn't create edifying work, your doctrine's no good. Now he goes on with this whole thing. Let's just read a little more here. He says, but speak thou the things which become sound doctrine. That doesn't mean which start and eventually become a doctrine. It means it's becoming. Speak those things which are becoming. Now when we say somebody, all right, I told Sienna this morning when she come to see me, I said, boy, you really look becoming in that dress. What did I mean?
Great.
It really suits you. Looks good on you, right? Those things which are becoming. Does that make sense? What is the church in this world today? The bride of Christ. Then how should we be acting in a becoming manner? So he says, verse 2. He gets into details. He says, the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith, in charity, and patience. The aged women likewise, and be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not giving to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. All you men highlight that verse. Obedient to their own husbands. Right? I never met a man working in the shipyard that didn't know that verse. They all know that one, don't they? It says, young men likewise. And he's just going on telling them how to handle themselves, isn't he? Watch verse 7. In all things showing thyself a pattern of good works. In doctrine showing uncorruptness, gravity, sincerity, sound speech that cannot be condemned, that he that is of the contrary part may be ashamed, having no evil thing to say of you. Now how do you oppose a heretic in your actions? Folks, you don't get down on the same level and fight and argue with him. We're not told to do that. And now watch, you say, well, how do you deal with this? Because you're going to have to deal with it eventually if you ever teach or anything. But go back to Galatians and watch how Paul tells us. It starts with your intention and your attitude. All right, here's a teacher here. And now this teacher has got to deal with some problem in the assembly, right? Somebody's actions are affecting the whole group. Now, does this ever happen? Yeah, folks, we had it happening here. A little small group like this. We've had people's actions become such a problem that you got to do something, right? So the actions are wrong. Well, if the actions are wrong, the man that's got to deal with it knows one thing. The thinking must be wrong, right? So the next thing you've got to determine before you deal with it, in my estimation, what I can see in the scripture would be this. I've got to correct this thing which everybody can see, right? Remember the man in Corinth that was sleeping with his stepmom? You remember what Paul said the problem was? This thing's commonly reported. Everybody in the town knew about it, right? And what do y'all reckon the pagans were saying? Oh, that's some Christians. See there?
Well, the pagans probably already knew it because those Christians was already out talking from.
Yeah, probably. They were, but you know, the point is, was the thing openly known? Now, are you and I called as Christians to hire background investigators and research each other? No, folks, we're talking about that which brings reproach on Christ, aren't we? Okay, so the actions have to be dealt with. Then you know the thinking is wrong, but before you deal with the thinking, in my estimation, you've got to figure out what's the motive. Because if the motive is sincere, you kind of deal with it one way. If the motive is obviously insincere, then that method of handling it's not going to work. Let me show you what I mean. Galatians 1. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault. Now, overtaken. Can every one of us be overtaken in a fault? We can be overtaken in a physical fault. We can be overtaken in a mental doctrine. And we can be overtaken in a motive. Can't we? Don't we all know what it means to find yourself where you've done something to get attention? That happens real quick with a human being, doesn't it? Well, when you recognize that that's the thing, you've got to realize, okay, stop, let's back up here. But he says, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted.
Where you?
Galatians 6:1.
6:1.
What'd I say?
1:1.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, y'all. Galatians 6:1. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, this is a brother, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. I would suggest to you that the man that doesn't act that way generally shows himself not to be spiritual. Now the next verse he says, bear you one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Now what did Christ say all the law came down to?
Yeah.
Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as himself. All right, should anyone ever be glad? Y'all ever met anybody that likes we all know people that like controversy, don't we? Me and Lexi grew up in households that I'm thankful for today. We grew up in households with controversy, therefore both of us hate it. Now, we avoid it at all costs, and we probably, it's to our detriment sometimes. We ought to take things head on that we don't. And I apologize to y'all for letting stuff go too far sometimes, but what about the person that looks for controversy? They like the opportunity to have squabbling and arguing, don't they? Is that the attitude? Huh?
Misery loves company.
Misery loves company. They love a good contention, don't they? I told him, I'm sure, I know Samantha's watching, but when I first got around Scott and Cajun folks, they were loud and they just loved a good argument. Not all of them. Samantha's about as quiet and peaceful as can be, but Scott and his friends, I thought, look, first time I was around them, I squared off. I thought, we fixing to fight. But it wasn't. It wasn't a fight to them. It was just normal arguing. They loved it. Man, Scott would debate with you down to just loved it. And it just was totally different to me, right? Is that the attitude we ought to have towards this type thing? Folks, this type thing is heartbreaking amongst believers. And yet it does happen, doesn't it? So how do you deal with it? You deal with it very cautiously. You know why you're so sympathetic towards dealing with it? Because you always know, I might be next. It might be me that falls next. I have fallen into bad doctrine and others tried to correct me and I'd have none of it. I know what it means to be absolutely wrong and think you're absolutely right. When you see one of the videos of an animal caught in a trap, I remember watching one, a raccoon, caught in a trap, and y'all, I don't want to say, y'all all know what they'll do to get out of the trap. Just gnawing, right? Isn't that heartbreaking? Think of a brother or sister caught in a doctrine like that. They can't see it, and they're gnawing away at their own parts, aren't they? Well, how would you treat that raccoon? Wouldn't you be sympathetic towards him, trying to get him out of the trap? Who's the only one that can free them from the trap? The Lord. But what does the Lord use? Brothers and sisters in Christ. Now he says, verse 3, for if a man think himself to be something, when he is nothing, he deceiveth himself. Now there's a man's main problem, to think we're something when we're nothing, isn't it? Y'all ever notice when you and I get offended at something? Generally speaking, what's the source of offense? Is it what the other guy did? It's that we think too highly of ourselves. My rights have been infringed upon, right? What about my rights? We had the dog here this morning eating the cat food. The neighbors let the dog run everywhere, and everybody complains, it's pounding all, they just don't care. You can go outside and holler and scream and act like they don't, it's just like they're oblivious, the dog's everywhere, right? Well, I walked out this morning and there's the dog, left, and I come back in and I said to Wayne, I said, man, they just let that dog, he eats all the cat food and the cats don't, that's what he does. As soon as you put it out, he eats it. So I said to Wayne, I said, I wish they'd do something with him. And Wayne, in maturity and kindness and spiritual minded, said, yeah, he said, but I tell you what, that ain't worth trouble with your neighbor. Y'all know what? It ain't. It ain't worth trouble with that neighbor. You say, yeah, but you got a right. What right have I got? You know we've been raised to say, no, now what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. Okay, if you want to take that stance, let's start with ourselves. What do I have a right to as I'm naturally born? Death and hell. You want your rights? Start there. You got a right. I deserve to go to hell. Now, just as soon as I would say something to that neighbor about that dog, and I'd have a social right, wouldn't I?
Al says forbearance.
Forbearance, yeah. See, that's experience, isn't it? Do you know I have experienced this many times in my stupidity? Just as soon as I would say something, guess what the next day would present the opportunity to do?
Apologize.
Well, yeah, but something would be able, where I'd be able to talk to them about the Lord. And what would I have done by insisting on my rights?
You lost that right.
And you'd say, oh no, I'm sorry, but that's just not right. Well, that's not right socially. But what does the Lord say? Paul said, if a man defrauds you, let him defraud you. Now that's hard to swallow, isn't it? Man, that really goes against the grain with us, doesn't it? But is it better than the contention? Okay. But when it comes to heresy, are we now talking about, I need to keep the door open for this person whereby I can preach the gospel to them? Or are we now talking about this person is bringing harm on everybody in the assembly by this bad teaching? You see the difference? One is being all things to all people for the good of the gospel, right? But the other is standing for the gospel. We're told that we must defend the faith that was once delivered to the saints. If let's say one of y'all were cooking a big, mixing dough for bread, right? And I come in and I got some arsenic. And I'm wanting to put the arsenic in that dough. And you're cooking the dough for your family. Well, what would you do? You ain't going to let me near that pot, are you? Are you going to defend that pot? I mean, you're going to defend it against... You are, aren't you? But what if I didn't have arsenic? What if I was a starving kid that ain't eaten 3 days and wanted a bite of that dough? You find so you need to let me have that dough or give me something better, wouldn't you? See, in one case you're acting one way, but in another, because the intention's different, isn't it? Now, we won't read it to save time, but do y'all remember the story back there in the days of Elisha? Not Elijah, Elisha. They had a pot they were cooking in the school of the prophets. Look, the school of the prophets is where they train. We'd say like training for teaching, right? And they've got this stirring the soup. And one of the guys, unknowingly, went out and picked some wild gourds out in the world. Remember that story? He thought, hey, this will be great in the soup. We'll add some gourds to the soup. He came back and shredded them in there. And somebody spotted him and said, uh-oh, there's poison in the soup. Y'all remember that story? Now, you say that soup is ruined, throw it out. They said, what are we going to do? Apparently some of them had already, there's poison in there, right? And Elisha, in his old age, calmly said, everybody calm down, stop, stop. Like Mr. Owl would say, all right, everybody take a deep breath here, right? He said, get me some meal. Meal is wheat that they make bread with. Get me some meal. And what did he do? He began to sprinkle the meal in the soup. Now, what's that a picture of? How do you correct poison doctrine? You put the truth in there. Where do we get the meal from? The word, the bread, right here. Right. How do you correct those things? You correct it with the word. And in general, it never comes down to that. Look, y'all know here, some of y'all have been coming here a long time, and y'all know, hey, there's just been like once or twice, which we've had to deal with anything, and nothing ever contentious. I mean, we've hardly had to deal with anything, have we? You say, well, that's because you're so wonderful, then you don't know me. The only reason I can accredit that to is by the grace of God. If you preach the cross, I'm telling y'all, the gospel will take care of these things itself. People will remove themselves, people will it just does everything it's supposed to do. God never left this thing in charge to men to leave it at our whims and opinions, did He? So then when we deal with heresy, is heresy a wile of the devil? How can you always, you can deal with any heresy you ever, I don't care how much Bible you know, how can you deal with every heresy that will ever be presented you? Hey, did Adam have a belly button, the guy says, right? Well, what do you answer to that? But you know, I don't know that. The only thing I can be sure of, and where do you come back to? You come back to that cross. Wayne always tells me, and Wayne talks to people about the Lord out in public more than anybody I know. And he said, when you talk to them, I've noticed this too, whether they realize it or not, they're always wanting to get you off of that cross, aren't they? Even if they believe the Bible, they'll mention something that they know back in the Old Testament that can bring them some glory or anything. And what it generally amounts to is, either they're just wanting to show you, who are you talking to me? I know the Bible, let me show you what I know. Or they're under conviction about their sins, and when you start poking on the sore spot, what do people do? They move. Yeah. So Wayne says, you start talking about the cross, and Wayne, what will they do every time? They say, yeah, man, back there, you know, did you, right?
Or back up.
And Wayne said, yeah, you just gotta, well, you just let them talk and smile and all, and every time they stop talking, what do? You come right back to the cross. You can withstand every heresy by standing on this. You know, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to say one way or another. The one thing I know is I'm certain that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and whether Adam had a belly button or not don't affect the fact that Christ had to die for Adam because of his sin. Now, I don't know about that belly button. I also don't know the date of the second coming, but it doesn't matter, because if you don't believe on the cross of the Lord Jesus Christ, when that day comes, you're going to hell anyway. And like I said, well, you think that, you know, just anything. Can y'all think of anything the person could bring up that you can't go back to the cross and remove the doubt? No. Always, folks. If a person doesn't stand on the cross, no matter what your defense is going to be, it's going to fail anyway, isn't it? Okay? All right. Well, if y'all have no questions, we'll stop there and move on next week. All right. Thank y'all.